The house was wrapped in an eerie silence, broken only by the faint hum of the baby monitor. A soft nightlight cast a golden glow over the nursery, its warm light brushing against the pastel-colored walls. The crib, positioned carefully in the center of the room, held 6-month-old Noah. Small, delicate, and heartbreakingly still. His tiny chest rose and fell in steady breaths, but his legs remained unmoving. No kicking, no shifting, no wiggling of toes. For months, Olivia and Ryan had watched their son lie motionless, trapped in a cruel reality they couldn't change. The doctors had given them the same answer over and over. There was nothing to be done. No explanation, no cure, just empty reassurances that sometimes life simply wasn't fair. Outside the nursery, Olivia sat curled up on the living room couch, cradling a soft blue baby blanket against her chest. It still smelled like Noah, like powdery sweetness and innocence, a fading reminder of the little boy who once reached for her with eager hands, his legs freely kicking against the air. She clutched the fabric tightly, as if holding onto it might bring back everything she was slowly losing. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She was tired of crying, tired of sleepless nights spent scouring medical articles for answers that didn't exist, tired of praying for a miracle that never seemed to come. "I don't know how much more I can take," she whispered, her voice raw from holding back sobs. Ryan sat beside her, his hands clasped together, his gaze distant. He had always been the strong one, the steady one. But even now, Olivia could see the cracks forming in him too. The exhaustion, the helplessness, it was swallowing them both whole. "We have to keep hoping," he murmured, but even to his own ears the words felt like a lie. At their feet, a small golden retriever puppy stirred. Milo, only a few months old himself, had always been drawn to Noah in a way neither Olivia nor Ryan fully understood. He was never far from the crib, always watching over the baby with an unwavering loyalty. But tonight something was different. Milo's small body was rigid, his ears perked with a sharp attentiveness. His tail, usually wagging happily, was unnaturally still. He was staring at the nursery door, his dark eyes filled with something Olivia couldn't quite place. "Milo," she called softly, watching as the puppy gave a slow whimper. He didn't look at her. He didn't look at Ryan. He was focused entirely on the quiet nursery beyond them. "At least he loves Noah," Olivia murmured, forcing a tired smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. "I just wish love was enough to fix this." Milo let out another low sound, barely more than a breath. His small frame trembled slightly as he took a hesitant step toward the nursery. Something about it sent a shiver down Olivia's spine. She brushed the feeling away. She was exhausted. Paranoia was bound to creep in after so many sleepless nights. Ryan reached down, scratching behind Milo's ears. "Maybe he knows," he said softly. "Maybe he understands." Olivia wanted to believe it. She wanted to believe in something, anything, that might explain why her son had been robbed of the simple gift of movement. But reality had taught her a painful truth. Sometimes love wasn't enough. What she didn't know was that love was about to do something extraordinary. Something that would defy logic, shake the foundations of everything they thought they knew. Something that would change everything. The house was steeped in the kind of silence that felt heavier than noise. The kind of quiet that made every breath, every heartbeat feel too loud. Olivia sat with her hands wrapped tightly around her own arms, as if bracing herself against an invisible force that had been pressing down on her for months. Ryan sat beside her, unmoving, staring at nothing. Their son was sleeping soundly just a few feet away, but there was no peace in their hearts. The weight of their exhaustion had turned into something else, something deeper, something darker. It wasn't just fatigue anymore. It was grief for a life their son might never have. Grief for the things he might never do. Olivia had seen the pity in the doctor's eyes when they delivered the same empty reassurances. They had stopped saying, "Give it time." Stopped pretending they believed Noah would ever move again. She felt Ryan's hand brush against hers. Hesitant, uncertain. It was the first time in a long time that he'd reached for her, and the touch made her throat tighten. They had tried to be strong for each other, but the cracks were showing. Milo stirred at their feet again, letting out a small, restless whimper. His golden fur glowed softly under the dim living room light, but his expression was anything but calm. He was fixated on the nursery door now, eyes locked onto it as though he saw something they couldn't. Then he stood, not in the lazy, stretching way that puppies do after a long nap, but with purpose. Ears forward, body tense, tail low. He took one slow step toward the dark hallway that led to Noah's room, then another. He paused just before the doorway, his tiny frame rigid, his ears twitching. Olivia frowned. "Milo?" The puppy didn't look back. He let out another soft, pleading whimper, pressing his nose against the slightly open door. The nursery was silent, just as it had been every other night. Noah was still in his crib, still unmoving, just like always. But something about the way Milo was acting made Olivia's stomach tighten. She stood without thinking, her pulse quickening as she stepped toward the hallway. Ryan followed without a word, sensing her unease. The closer they got, the more urgent Milo's movements became. He paced a small circle in front of the crib, then stood on his hind legs, pressing his front paws against the wooden bars. His tail wasn't wagging. His body was tense. And then he let out a low, whimpering sound, a desperate, almost pleading noise. The baby monitor crackled softly. Noah made a sound, a tiny, barely audible noise, a whimper. Olivia froze, her breath catching in her throat. She knew every single sound her son made. She had memorized the little coos and murmurs, the way he breathed in his sleep. But this was different. She stepped forward, gripping the side of the crib, her eyes scanning Noah's tiny form. He was still, just as he always was. His hands rested near his chest, his breathing steady, his dark lashes fanned over pale cheeks. But then, barely noticeable, just the smallest, most delicate movement, his fingers twitched. Olivia's breath hitched. It was so faint, so fleeting, that for a second she thought she had imagined it. But then it happened again, a slow, hesitant curl of his tiny fingers. "Ryan," she whispered, her voice shaking. Ryan was already beside her, his eyes wide with disbelief. Did he just... Noah's fingers curled again. It was subtle, so small that it might have gone unnoticed if they hadn't been watching him so closely. But it was real. It was undeniable. Milo let out a small, excited bark, nudging the crib again. His tail started to wag, slow at first, then faster, like he knew something incredible was happening. Olivia reached for Noah's hand, brushing her fingers against his tiny palm, hardly daring to breathe. "Noah, baby," she murmured, her voice trembling. Noah's fingers curled around hers, weak, fragile, but unmistakably there. A sharp gasp tore from Olivia's lips, her free hand flying to her mouth as tears spilled down her cheeks. "Oh my God," Ryan whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Oh my God, Liv. He's moving. The weight of months of fear and heartbreak pressed against Olivia's chest, so overwhelming she could barely contain it. But for the first time in so long, the crushing despair was lifting, replaced by something she had almost forgotten how to feel: hope. But this was only the beginning. Olivia's body trembled as she clutched Noah's tiny hand, feeling the weak but undeniable grip of his fingers. It was real. It was happening. Tears streamed down her cheeks, a silent prayer escaping her lips as she turned to Ryan. His expression was frozen between disbelief and overwhelming emotion, his breath coming in uneven bursts. Ryan reached out, his hand shaking as he carefully brushed Noah's arm. "Noah?" His voice was barely above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might shatter whatever miracle was unfolding before them. And then, another movement. Noah's tiny fingers flexed again, this time with more certainty. His hand, which had remained limp for so long, twitched as if waking from a deep slumber. Olivia let out a choked sob, gripping Ryan's arm with one hand while holding onto Noah with the other. Milo, still perched on his hind legs, let out an excited bark. His tail wagged so fast it was almost a blur, his entire little body vibrating with an excitement that neither Olivia nor Ryan could understand. Until now. He had been waiting for this. He had known. Olivia pressed her forehead against the edge of the crib, her whole body racked with emotion. "He's moving," she whispered, the words tasting foreign on her tongue after so many months of hopelessness. "Ryan, he's really moving." Ryan scrubbed a hand over his face, trying to steady himself. I don't understand. How is this happening?" Noah made another tiny sound, a soft coo, barely audible but full of life. Then, as if pulled by some unseen force, his hand slowly lifted. It was shaky, uncertain, but it moved. His fingers wiggled as if testing their own strength. And for the first time in 6 months there was life where there had once been only stillness. And then it happened. Noah's leg twitched. It was slight, just the faintest shift beneath his blanket, but it sent a wave of shock through Olivia's entire body. She gasped, her hands flying to her mouth as she turned to Ryan, eyes wide and filled with astonishment. Ryan's breath hitched. "Did you see that?" Noah's leg twitched again. This time, it wasn't just a fluke. It wasn't just some involuntary spasm. It was controlled, deliberate. Milo barked again, his front paws bouncing excitedly against the crib's wooden frame. His golden eyes sparkled with joy, as if he had been waiting for them to finally see what he had known all along. Ryan's legs nearly gave out beneath him as he staggered back, gripping the crib for support. "Oh my God," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Liv, this isn't possible." But it was. It was happening right in front of them. Olivia reached for Noah again, her trembling fingers brushing over his tiny foot beneath the blanket. He had always been so still, so lifeless in a way that had shattered her heart every single day. But now he was stirring. Another twitch, then another. Then his little foot shifted. A strangled sob broke from Olivia's lips as she turned, gripping Ryan's shirt. "He's waking up," she cried, unable to contain the emotion overflowing inside her. "He's coming back to us." Ryan let out a laugh, one of pure disbelief, pure joy. It was the kind of laugh that came after months of suffocating grief, the kind that felt foreign after being buried under so much pain. We need to call someone, a doctor. Somebody needs to see this." But Olivia didn't move. She was too afraid to look away, too terrified that if she blinked, this moment would vanish like a dream. Noah let out another tiny noise. his fingers flexing once more before curling into a loose fist. Then, as if drawn by some unseen force, his eyes fluttered open. For a second, there was only silence. Olivia's breath caught as she stared into those deep brown eyes, glossy with sleep but alive, truly, fully alive. It had been months since she had seen them open in a way that felt aware. "Noah?" she whispered, her voice trembling. The baby blinked up at her, confused but present. And then, as if pulled by an instinct stronger than anything they could comprehend, his gaze drifted to Milo. The puppy let out a soft whimper, his body still, his tail wagging just slightly as he inched closer, and then Noah moved. Not just his fingers this time, not just a twitch. Noah lifted his arm. It was slow, shaky, but filled with purpose. His tiny hand reached toward the edge of the crib, his fingers stretching toward the soft golden fur he had always known but never truly touched. And then, against all odds, against everything the doctors had told them, Noah reached for Milo. A sob tore from Olivia's throat, so powerful that it shook her whole body. Ryan turned away, his hands pressing against his face as he struggled to keep himself together. But there was no hiding the tears in his eyes. Milo, as if sensing the significance of the moment, lowered his head. He pressed his warm nose against Noah's tiny fingers, nuzzling gently. And Noah. He held on, weak, fragile, but undeniable. His tiny fingers curled into the puppy's fur. And just like that, something inside Olivia and Ryan shattered. For the first time in months, they weren't drowning. They weren't trapped in the fear of what they might lose. For the first time in months, they felt something else. They felt hope. Milo let out another soft, happy bark, his tail wagging again. This time faster, full of certainty. Because he knew. He had always known. This wasn't the end of Noah's story. It was only the beginning. Ryan dropped to his knees beside the crib, his breath coming in short, uneven bursts. His hands trembled as he reached for Noah's tiny foot. Afraid, so afraid, that if he touched him, this fragile miracle would vanish like mist in the morning sun. But when his fingers brushed against the soft fabric of the baby's onesie, he felt it again. A twitch, a shift, and then a kick. A weak, tiny kick, but a kick nonetheless. A sound escaped Ryan's lips, somewhere between a sob and a laugh. He turned to Olivia, eyes wide, disbelief and overwhelming joy crashing together inside him. "Liv, he kicked," he choked out, shaking his head as if he couldn't believe the words coming from his own mouth. "Did you see that? He kicked!" Olivia could barely breathe. She had spent 6 months preparing herself for the worst. 6 months grieving a future that doctors told her would never come. And yet here they were, watching their son fight his way back to them. Tears spilled down her face as she clutched Noah's tiny hand, pressing soft kisses against his fingers. Noah let out a soft, sleepy coo, his deep brown eyes still locked onto Milo. The golden retriever puppy let out a small whimper, lowering his head as if in silent encouragement. His tail wagged once, slow and deliberate, his entire little body filled with an unshakable certainty. Milo had never stopped believing, and somehow neither had Noah. Ryan let out a shaky breath, running a hand through his hair as he tried to make sense of what was happening. "This isn't just reflexes, Liv," he whispered. "This is real." Before Olivia could respond, Noah stirred again. His small hands flexed, his tiny fingers curling tighter around the puppy's fur. Then, his legs moved. Not just a twitch, not just an involuntary jerk, a movement. A true, deliberate movement. Olivia let out a strangled sob, covering her mouth with both hands. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Ryan, he's moving." Ryan pressed a hand against his chest, as if physically holding his heart in place. His entire body shook with the weight of what they were witnessing. "We need to call someone," he said, voice thick with emotion. "A doctor, a specialist. Someone needs to see this." But Olivia shook her head, gripping Noah's tiny foot in her hand, afraid that if she let go, this moment would slip through her fingers. "Not yet," she whispered. "Just let him keep going." Noah's eyelids fluttered, his breathing steady but full of something new, something strong. His legs kicked again, stronger this time, more sure, more alive, and with every tiny movement, every little stretch, the weight that had been pressing down on Olivia's chest for months began to lift. The despair, the hopelessness, the endless nights of crying in silence, of feeling like she had failed her son before he had even had a chance to live. All of it was dissolving, because Noah was proving them all wrong. Because Noah was fighting. Because Noah was moving. Milo barked again, a small, excited sound pressing his paws against the crib's wooden frame. His bright brown eyes never left Noah, as if silently urging him forward, as if telling him, "Keep going. You can do this. I believe in you." And Noah listened. His tiny body, which had been still and lifeless for so long, responded in a way that no doctor, no medical expert could have ever predicted. His legs twitched, then stretched, then kicked. Tiny movements, but movements nonetheless. His little arms trembled, reaching, always reaching, for the soft golden fur he had always known was there, even in the quiet darkness of his paralysis. Then, with one final push, one last burst of fragile strength, Noah lifted his tiny leg off the mattress. For a heartbeat, the world stood still. And then, in a single instant, everything changed. Noah let out a soft, joyful coo, a sound so small, yet so powerful that it shattered every ounce of fear Olivia and Ryan had been holding on to for months. His fingers flexed tighter around Milo's fur, his tiny feet shifting beneath the blanket. And then Noah smiled. A real, genuine smile. A smile that Olivia hadn't seen in so long, it felt like a lifetime ago. Her heart clenched, overwhelmed with a love so fierce it burned in her chest. She let out a sob, reaching for Ryan, who was still kneeling beside the crib, his hands shaking, his face buried in his palms. "We need to tell someone," Ryan whispered, voice barely audible through the weight of his emotions. "Liv, this is a miracle." Olivia nodded, unable to speak. Because it was. It was a miracle. A miracle that had come not from medicine, not from science, but from love. From the unwavering love of a tiny golden retriever puppy who had never left Noah's side. Milo let out another soft whimper, pressing his nose against Noah's hand. The baby responded instantly, his tiny fingers grasping the soft fur, holding on tight. And in that moment, Olivia realized something. Sometimes the greatest miracles don't come in grand, dramatic moments. Sometimes they come in the form of a single, tiny movement. A twitch of fingers, a stretch of toes, a heartbeat of hope. And sometimes, just sometimes, they come in the form of a little golden puppy who never stops believing, even when the rest of the world has given up. Olivia sat frozen, hands trembling against the crib's wooden frame. She could barely process what she was seeing, what she was feeling. For months, she had prepared herself for the worst, for a lifetime of watching her son remain motionless, trapped in a body that refused to respond. But now he was moving. Not just twitching, not just involuntary spasms, real, undeniable movement. Noah's legs kicked once more, his tiny feet shifting beneath the soft blanket, his fingers curling around Milo's fur with a newfound strength. The puppy let out a happy bark, nuzzling into Noah's tiny hand, his entire body vibrating with excitement. Ryan let out a sharp, disbelieving breath, dragging his hands down his face. He was shaking, whether from joy or shock, Olivia wasn't sure. "This can't be happening," he whispered. "Liv, this isn't possible." But it was. It was happening. It was real. A sob tore from Olivia's throat as she reached for her son, brushing trembling fingers over his chubby little cheeks. He was warm. He was alive. And for the first time in so long, he was fighting. Fighting to come back to them. Fighting to prove that miracles were real. Ryan turned, scrambling for his phone with shaking hands. "I need to record this. No one will believe us." But Olivia barely heard him. She was too lost in the moment, too consumed by the sight of her baby boy, her precious Noah, lifting his tiny hands toward Milo. The puppy leaned in, pressing his forehead gently against Noah's fingers, his golden fur soft beneath the baby's grasp. And then, as if drawn by some invisible force, Noah turned his head, his deep brown eyes locking onto Olivia's. Her heart stopped. For the first time in months, he wasn't just responding to touch. He was looking at her. Really looking at her. A fresh wave of tears spilled down her cheeks as she cupped his tiny face in her hands. "Baby," her voice cracked, breaking under the weight of emotion. "Mommy's here, sweetheart. Mommy's here." Noah let out a soft, sleepy sound, a tiny coo of recognition, and then, with slow, careful movements, his tiny arms stretched forward, reaching for her. It was the smallest gesture, and yet it meant everything. Ryan let out a shaky laugh, dropping to his knees beside Olivia. He wrapped an arm around her, his entire body trembling. "We got him back," he choked out. "Liv, we got him back." Milo let out a small whimper, as if he understood the magnitude of the moment. He wagged his tail, his warm brown eyes never leaving Noah's. He had known. All along he had known. Ryan pressed a kiss to Olivia's temple, his voice thick with emotion. "We need to call the doctors. We need to tell them." But Olivia shook her head, brushing a gentle hand through Noah's soft curls. "Not yet," she whispered. "Let's just have this moment." And so they did. For the first time in months, they weren't drowning in grief. They weren't haunted by the weight of uncertainty. For the first time, they had hope. Hope that Noah would keep fighting. Hope that, against all odds, he would find his way back to them. Hope that miracles, true, undeniable miracles, were real. And all of it had started with a puppy. A tiny, golden retriever who had never left Noah's side. A puppy who had believed in him, long before anyone else did. A puppy who had refused to give up, even when the world told them all to stop hoping. This was only the beginning. Noah's journey was far from over. But for the first time in so long, they weren't alone. They had Milo, they had each other, and they had hope. Hope that would carry them through whatever came next. Because sometimes miracles don't happen in grand, earth-shattering ways. Sometimes miracles are quiet. Sometimes they are as small as a single twitch of fingers, a tiny movement of toes, a heartbeat of hope. And sometimes, just sometimes, miracles come in the form of a wagging tail and a pair of unwavering, golden brown eyes. And that's why we should never stop believing in love, in kindness, and in the power of hope. Because sometimes the smallest acts of love lead to the biggest miracles. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video, leave a comment, and share it with someone who needs a little hope today. And if you love inspiring stories like this one, subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you never miss another incredible moment. Together, let's spread love, kindness, and the belief that miracles truly happen.